we are trying to figure it out and make this a smoother transition. So that being said, let's go ahead and ask our next question here, which is, what is the percent survival recovery rate with people with underlying health conditions? So they're asking about underlying health conditions. And so what we are seeing is that it depends on that underlying health condition, with some conditions being a little bit more serious than others. If we are looking specifically at something like obesity, and if we are looking at something like diabetes, I think you're seeing a little bit greater of a mortality rate. Now, I do want to kind of segue into something, if Dr. Griggs is okay with this segue, is that one of the underlying health conditions that I think is important for us to start talking about and thinking about is the underlying health condition of communities of color that have been structurally discriminated against over the course of past several centuries, whose healthcare and whose well-being and whose status in society has been significantly diminished, not respected, and have been actively worked against. And I think that it's important for us to really start considering that to be a risk factor or underlying health condition. Dr. Griggs, is this something you want to talk about right now?
Yeah, I do, but I want to make sure that we couch this correctly. It's not just this is an underlying condition that affects health. I don't want people to think that communities of color having melanin in your skin is not a predisposing condition to COVID-19 infection. There are studies being done. There are people out there that are saying that people of color are more likely to be infected, and that's not true. What they're noticing is that the bodies of the people that show up in the morgue are people that are being infected, and it's more of a human being, a underlying condition, an access thing, and potentially a behavior thing, but it has nothing to do, right now, the studies are showing, I don't want you thinking this is a black people disease, this is a brown people disease, this is any color people disease. This is a disease of human beings that is adversely affecting those of least access, historically least access. But don't think because you have in your skin that you're more predisposed to this virus. It's about your health, and I want to make sure we separate the terms of health. There have been health disparities and there have been health iniquities. Equal and equity are two different words meaning two different things. So we can talk about the numbers as they relate, because there are numbers as you relate those are more melanin to those without black. The rate in black communities in some places is high to 3 to 1, in other places it's 7 to 1. But again, this is not a genetic thing. Doc? Yeah,
absolutely, and I think that's important. But again, these risk factors are not obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease. These are risk factors that society that you're not like born. I mean, sure, there are people who are born that are going to develop like type 1 diabetes. This is type of diabetes that's genetically predisposition. Those people who are going to have a genetic predisposition to be hyperlipidemic, that means you have high cholesterol in your system, which also then means that you're likely to potentially have more cardiovascular or cerebral vascular illnesses like heart attacks or strokes. But those are rare. The conditions that we see in society now are conditions that society has, are the conditions that people who live in our society that focuses on, let's say, fast foods, that focuses on low-income jobs that force people to find it difficult to eat healthy, to exercise, to find access to healthcare. Our healthcare system is obviously needs significant improvement as well. And I think that from that perspective, I think it's important for us to consider that these risk factors that we're seeing, diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular diseases, are diseases, like I usually refer to them as diseases of poverty and poor. Dr. Griggs, Layla asks us a very good question and says, I have a part-time job. I'll read the rest of it. I have a part-time job that does not want to be involved in contact tracing through my full-time job. In other words, what she says if somebody gets sick at my school during the week, my Saturday job is upset that they may grouped into this. However, isn't this inevitable? Is there a reason they don't want to be involved? I'm very confused. So do you understand? That's a really good question. Do you understand what they're asking?
I absolutely understand what this is a economy.
I know that.
What's that?
I know.
Yeah, it's an economy. It's an economy thing, and it's a marketing thing. And no one wants to be known as the hotspot, especially in this state where there are not a bunch of answers coming to their job and saying that there's someone that's had COVID-19 at this place of business, because it could stigmatize them and affect their economy or their influx of customers or clients or whatever. I can understand their apprehension from a business perspective, but contact tracing unfortunately asks those questions, and privacy is protected and maintained as best as possible, but that is a part of it, and that's the big issue.
So is there a way to, how does that work? I mean, if somebody comes knocking on your door, I'm sure, what are the laws? I know that you've taken some courses in this and you're quickly becoming an expert in contact tracing in the US. What are some of the laws associated with that? If somebody comes knocking on your door, can they avoid you? Sort of the way that the police have a warrant, if they want something, they can physically enter your premises. And
right now, there's no martial law associated with it. This is something that your name was given to us, and you have been in contact with someone who's positive. They can't even tell you who that person was because of HIPAA, but this is more of a social responsibility thing that you participate and you tell where you've been, who you've been in contact with, and then you're asked to give those contact numbers. But there's no fine, there's no penalty, there's no jail time, there's nothing. But this is something that it's a social responsibility thing, and to keep the privacy, to maintain as much privacy, and to keep it as sacred as possible. Doc, you've actually done contact tracing in other countries where the laws have been different, quite different. But it's not a mandated thing. It's something that we would ask you to do for the sake of social responsibility and community.
So what if a business didn't want to be involved in contact tracing? For them to be open, don't they have to be registered with the city and the state? And then in doing so, don't they then give aren't they then obligated to participate in contact tracing?
Well, that depends. I'm not sure of the exact arrangements, but that's my understanding. And the reporting, if someone does report positive, it's immediately reported to the governing authorities, and the state's running that system right now. But again, your privacy. This is first of all, let's go back to the very beginning. Contact tracing is not anything new. Doc, you're an infectious disease doc. You've been dealing with contact tracing for a long time, but I want people to understand, we're very cavalier open. We're becoming more open as the conditions now that it is front and center as the pandemic. But being diagnosed with COVID-19 as COVID-19 positive is your medical condition. This is medical information that is protected by HIPAA. This is not something that can and should freely be shared unless it's by you or without your written permission. This is not something that you can just casually say. So it's taken that seriously. So the information is anonymized. The contacts that you put out there, they're anonymized, and it's as private as possible, but it's for the sake of public health. But there's no mandated law, there's no billboards, there's no quote unquote putting on blast, as you want to call it. There's none of that. I mean, this is your medical condition. To deal with it as you feel most socially responsible. The hopes are that the common good and for everyone around you and those you care about, that you would cooperate.
That would definitely be the case, absolutely. And I'm not really sure why Layla's job would not want to help out, but I'm assuming it's what you were saying, that people just don't want to be
they don't want to be responsible. They don't stigmatize and social responsibility.
Absolutely. I know that our stream interrupted, but if people if they're able to come back on, we would love to still take some of your questions. We do still have some time. If in the interim, what I'll do is I'll just jump. Do you have something, Doc? Were you gonna say something?
Well, I was just thinking the other thing, though, is that if you have a business and someone is COVID-19 positive, it could more than affect your business. It could quarantine everyone that's in the building based on the current recommendations for the positive exposure.
Well, that just to me just seems crazy that people don't want to be involved with that.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about that all the time.
It would do more harm to a business, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
That if they ended up having if they just all it is, it's doing this, right? It's just and if you do that, you're gonna end up with a greater hotspot than anything else.
Yeah. So again, it's the balance in people's mind between economy and common good and healthcare. What are you going to do? But that is, let's just say those are not. I won't say that is exactly what they're asking, but that could be potentially in the balance of things that they're considering. It'd be interesting to know more about that situation before I'm not going to cast judgment on them. You just want to know what they could be considering, which is why they might be pushing back somewhat.
Got it. So Tamika wrote us back, and she said she asked about the asthma, but she wasn't able to hear the answer. Dr. Riggs, did you want to quickly just respond?
This is the respiratory virus that goes for the respiratory cells in through your nose and mouth to get to ultimately your lungs. If you're predisposed to conditions of the lungs, then that's a comorbid condition that makes you predisposed to potentially a worse outcome. In other words, you can get real sick. You can go in the hospital. Doc says, it's a comorbid condition, and each comorbid condition has its own numbers. But the most important thing is be real tight with your pulmonologist, your primary care doctor, whoever's taking care of your asthma right now. Be on top of all your pills. It's also allergy season, and know your triggers. Make sure you have, doc, we say we have people make sure they have a pulse ox, but most importantly, you want to make sure that you're talking to your provider and following and looking out for the signs and symptoms. You do have a comorbid condition of the lungs, and this is a respiratory virus, Doc.
Absolutely. So let's just kind of finish off here. We got some stories to go over. So this is a story here, Doc Riggs, that is looking at more than 100 cases in Germany traced back to a Frankfurt church services. So people are still doing the churches, man. They're still gathering, despite the research that shows that indoors, that church services, close contact, not social distancing. I don't know. I mean, how many times can we all this?
For what we signed up for, I'm willing to say it every day, all day, again and again and again. In any other circumstance, this would be water is wet news. The virus doesn't spread the virus, people spread the virus. The reason that we were able to open up is because the data allowed us to go out. We social distanced, we wore masks, we stayed away from each other, so less people caught the virus because less people were coming together. Now, as people go and they congregate and they get comfortable, they get lax and think the virus, we flip the switch and it's gone away. You're going to see numbers spike and people go up. There is a choir in Washington, Skagit Valley, Washington, where 87% of the people, 52 of the 61 people at a choir practice for 45 minutes, from one person being infected, 52 became infected. Sadly, 2 of them died. That was a documented a CDC article that we've referenced, and we will keep referencing. The virus doesn't care the reason that you're congregating. It could be for a birthday. It could be for a visit. It could be for a funeral. It could be for church. It could be for a party. It could be in a pool. It's almost like a green eggs and ham. I do not like them anywhere.
Dude, I was just about to go.
I do not. The virus. I do not like people together anywhere. I do not like them in a pool. I do not like them at a school. I do not like them at a church. I do not like them in a party. I don't like people together, not social distancing. If you're closer than 6 feet, not wearing masks, either or and both, the likelihood of you catching the virus is gonna happen. It goes up. It's gonna happen. Nothing has changed. We have no vaccine. We have no cure. The only thing the big thing that's changed is our behavior. And just like the data allowed us to go out, to experiment, the data will push us back in.
Absolutely. All right, so let's see what we got for another story here. And let's see what we got here. Look at this. I thought this was a fascinating story. I know that, we're not here to kind of, point fingers, but I thought it was an interesting study here. This was from The Guardian that shows that U.S. critics of stay-at-home orders are tied to fossil fuel funding. And I'll be happy to comment on that because I think I know what this is about. And what we're seeing here is that that we saw a large stock market crash, and we saw a lot of rich and very large corporations take a hit in their in finances. And I think what we are seeing is, and it was very well known that in Michigan we had very famous politicians that were paying for and supporting these stay-at-home protests as well. And it takes good investigative journalism, like what we saw at The Guardian, to show that there was Chevron and Exxon and some of these other big oil facilities or corporations were also paying for some of those stay-at-home orders. And I just thought that it was just important for us to recognize that. You can see that they are tied to fossil fuel funding. And I think it's just important for us to recognize that sometimes when we're in this fight, and we're in the fight to try to keep people safe and to keep the public health health stable, it's hard to fight against some of this big money. In which where their voice and their platform is a lot louder than ours. Tucker, do you have anything on this, or do you want me to move on?
Move on. I have nothing on that one. That was
got it. All right. Let's see. Our next story here is look at this. This is a story. This is something that we hear about all the time. COVID-19 patients are not infectious after 11 days. So what this really speaks to is something that we know, that the majority of infections that occur mostly at the beginning part of the disease process. So the infectious part of a person's disease process happens at the very beginning of their disease, usually within the first 6 to 7 to 8 days. So this was a small study that showed that people weren't infectious after 11 days. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, the first thing is that when we see studies, whether they're favorable or not, we want to make sure that we need to look at the sample size and see how many people are involved. Again, otherwise this shows some stuff that we were hoping and that we've been seeing in various studies. But when you hear about articles, you want to make sure they're peer reviewed and scrutinized by our colleagues. I think this is something that we've been seeing for a while over the last 10, 11 weeks. But you always want to make sure that I just touched my nose. Sorry, y'all. You always want to make sure that the number is large enough. Yeah, I think that's good news. But we want to make sure, as other people are watching, we want to make sure that they're scrutinizing the way that we do.
That's right. Again, I think the important part is that when people are asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic, that is the time that we most likely see infections to occur. By the time people feel symptomatic, they're less likely to be symptomatic or infectious at that point. This is the last study and the last news bit. This is something that you and I have been talking about to a large degree. I suspect that this is what this is about. Placentas from COVID-19 positive pregnant women show injury. There's no problems with the baby. The babies themselves are fine, but the placentas are showing some injury to them, and they're seeing abnormal blood flow between mother and babies. I have a few thoughts about that. Before I give mine, do you have any thoughts about that?
So for people that don't know, the placenta is it's the lifeline, part of the lifeline and the life force of the baby. The baby it has everything the baby needs while the baby's growing inside of your body. Once the baby's delivered, you then deliver the placenta. That's baby, and it encompasses it, encases it, and it takes care of it. Now, the reason that I'm not surprised there is, like you said, we've been talking about it for a while. You're going to start seeing studies come out saying that, and they started last week, saying that COVID-19 is ravaging, literally using those words, ravaging the inner linings of the blood vessels all over the body of people that are COVID positive. You're also seeing an increase in clots all over the body, and you're seeing signs of dementia, the lung, the places that are blood heavy, the brain, the heart conditions, the kidneys. You're seeing people with COVID toes, meaning that the blood vessels have been injured. The placenta, because it wraps around and it holds that baby and for 9 months, it's largely and heavily dependent on between mom and the baby on the blood of the mom to feed the baby. Now, the babies might be protected from the virus itself, but in the meantime, the COVID-19, if mom is protected, is affecting all of the blood vessels and doing damage, which is why you see a lot of times people, once they've recovered from COVID-19, having a long recovery period, anywhere from 6 months to a year. So I'm not surprised because we've been talking about it, but the mechanism where you have blood and blood vessels, you can see issues, and where you have clots, you can see issues on the other side. Doc?
Yeah, no, I strongly believe that what we're really talking about are the microemboli that we're seeing. They didn't mention it in the story, but I think it's important because this is something that Doc Griggs and I have been talking a lot about over the course of the last couple days. But I think what we're seeing is that injury that they're talking about is injury probably from the microembolisms and the microclots that we are seeing in COVID-19. It again is showing that there is some injury at the placenta, but fortunately, this is not injury that could potentially harm the babies. And I think for the most part, moms are still pretty healthy and they do pretty well. But what this speaks to is a disturbing trend that we've been seeing with respect to the increase in clotting that we're seeing amongst people with COVID-19.
This is a great illustration of the power of moms. Like, this is moms protect babies at all costs, and this is just another power of the human beings. I mean, again, it's, to me, in a strange way, this isn't just a sign that we're going to be okay on the other side of this. We just got to get through it. But the microembolism, when he says microembolism, he means microclots, blood clotting, small clots. This COVID-19 thing is causing all kind of damage to the inner linings of our blood vessels. It's causing clots, which is why you see the injury when he says microclots. As the blood vessels go further away from the heart, they get smaller and smaller and smaller. And the clots, and they get in the smallest blood vessels. The smallest blood vessels are the ones that help us with the air exchange in the parts of the lungs called the alveoli, which is why we see the shortness of breath, which is why we see the fluid building there for the damage. So a lot of it is starting to make sense. That Kawasaki's-like syndrome, and this does not have to do with moms and babies, but just a point of reference. When we talk about a multi-system organ disease like Kawasaki's, it's a blood vessel thing. Think about anywhere you have blood vessels, which is everywhere, and think about clots like being like BBs in a hose being everywhere, and think of the damage that random BBs could cause going real fast all over the body or all over a hose in a system. And that's kind of what's happening. And then each of the places of damage becomes sticky points potentially. And that's where the clots can come, and they shoot off and they go down, and they can cause strokes, they can cause damage, they can cause kidney failure, they can cause brain, they can cause dementia, they can cause all kinds of things that we're seeing. And that's just putting it in a context so we can all understand it. This virus is nothing to play with. Just because you're asymptomatic and you feel fine, it could cause all those things to someone else and potentially kill them. Doc?
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better myself. We have a daily podcast called NoiseFilter. You can find it on all of your favorite podcasting apps, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more. If you like what you hear, please give us a ranking and leave us a review. It helps more people find this podcast. And also, as always, if you want to help, please share our podcast and live show with your friends, family, and colleagues. With that being said, Doc Griggs.
You did that the wrong way. You got trouble like that. It's like 2 fingers. Yeah, get checked, get fit, get moving, breathe, check, step back, wear your mask. Wear your mask. Stay home.
Peace out. Hold on. Wear your mask.
Wear your mask. Wear your mask.
Wait.
Take care. We'll see y'all tomorrow. Check us out on NoiseFilterShow.com, the podcast. Doc, that's